Well, good morning. Nice to see you all this morning. If you've got a Bible with you today, go with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 is where we're going to be, and if you don't have a Bible with you and you'd like to follow along, you should be able to grab one of the Bibles that's in a chair rack in front of you. I wrote down the page number. I think it's 552. If it's not, it's really close to 552. That's the last, what's that? Okay, she's looking at what I wrote down in pen, really big, on my program, and I've still forgotten it. So 553 is the place that we're going to be today in the book of Ecclesiastes. Tom Brady, if you are one of the very small number of people who don't know who that is a guy that has it all. He is the quarterback for the New England Patriots. And he has a list of accomplishments that is really lengthy. In fact, the only real blight on his record is that he attended the University of Michigan. And I want to give apologies to my friends who are here from Michigan today. Tom Brady has won 5 Super Bowls. There are quarterbacks that would kill to win 1 Super Bowl. Tom Brady has won 5 of them. In 4 of those 5 Super Bowls that he has won, he has been elected the MVP of the Super Bowl. He has been the MVP of the NFL 3 times. And with the exception of perhaps Blake Bortles, he is considered one of the greatest quarterbacks. That's not a funny part. He is considered one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. But he isn't just about football. Another thing that Tom Brady has going for him is his health. He just played in a Super Bowl a couple of months ago at the age of 40. Okay, I can barely play church volleyball at the age of 38 without feeling sore the next day, and he is performing at the highest level possible at age 40. Tom Brady is famous. You can hardly walk through an airport, whether it's here in the United States or in other countries, you can hardly walk through an airport without seeing Tom Brady's face being used to sell watches and cologne and fashion and stuff like that. Tom Brady is married to a supermodel. Not just a model, a supermodel. One of the most recognizable supermodels in the world. Tom Brady is wealthy. He and his wife have a combined net worth of almost $500 million. Tom Brady is a man who has it all. And yet in a 60 Minutes interview back in 2009 that many of you are probably familiar with and will remember as I remind you of it, he had, at that point, won a measly 3 Super Bowls. But the interviewer was talking to him about all his accomplishments, and he kind of stopped the interview and he said this: "Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think that there's something greater out there for me?" And he talked a little bit about how everybody from the outside looking in looks at him and thinks that, man, this is the guy that's got it all. I mean, if you could just design a life, that wouldn't be a bad one to pattern it after. And yet, he says, it's got to be more than this. The interviewer said, well, what's the answer? And Tom Brady says this: I wish I knew. Today we're going to begin studying the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes seeks to provide answers to those kinds of questions that a guy like Tom Brady, with everything that you could possibly imagine in life, can't answer. Ecclesiastes tries to answer those questions. It tries to tell us and give us answers for how we can have meaning and purpose and the happiness that goes along with meaning and purpose in life. Ecclesiastes is a notoriously difficult book to understand, which is why there are probably many of you have never heard a sermon series through the book. But Ecclesiastes is in the Bible, which means that it is profitable for us. It's in there for a reason. And so we're going to do the hard work of studying it together, because I believe that when we get to the end, we are going to be richly rewarded. Today, what I'd like to do is introduce you to the book. There are so many things that I'd like to be able to tell you about this, distilling all of the things that I've been studying over the past few months together. But we're going to try to introduce you to the book today. We're going to talk about things like the name of the book, the author of the book, the purpose of the book, and then we're going to see how this book is intended to point us to Jesus. So let's dive right in and start talking about the name of the book. First of all, what's the deal with the name? I mean, when you turn in that book and you read, there's a title of the book named Ecclesiastes. Why in the world is it named Ecclesiastes? Well, that title is taken actually from the very first verse. So if you're in Ecclesiastes, look with me at chapter 1 and verse 1. And here's what the Word of God says. It starts this way: the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So for those of you who may not have a whole lot of background in the Bible, understand a lot about how the Bible is put together, the Old Testament, Genesis through Malachi, was largely written in Hebrew. So believe it or not, you're looking at a translation of that. The Bible was not written in English. The New Testament, beginning in Matthew and ending in Revelation, was written largely in Greek. So the Hebrew word that's translated as preacher there in the very first verse is the Hebrew word kohelet, depending on how you pronounce it, koheleth. Don't worry, we're not going to dive too deep here. But this word that's translated koheleth, that's translated preacher, is not a name, it's a title. And that title means assembler or gatherer, a person who assembles people or gathers people together, which is why it's been translated in a lot of our English translations as the preacher. Now, that still is only a piece of our journey to understanding why in the world this book is named Ecclesiastes. Well, in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, there was a translation of the Hebrew Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek called the Septuagint. When the translators put that together, they used the Greek word Ecclesiastes to translate that Hebrew word. Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes means a gatherer or an assembler. And so we get the title of our English Bible version of this book as Ecclesiastes. That's why it's called that. Now, if you've been around churchy stuff for a while, you might hear the word ecclesia in there. Did you hear the word ecclesia in there? So the New Testament word church is the Greek word ecclesia, and church simply means an assembly, a gathering. And so an ecclesiastes was a person who gathers or assembles people, much like a pastor would. And so the book is named after that person, the preacher, the kohelet, the ecclesiastes, who assembles the wisdom of this book and then gathers people, as it were, to hear the wisdom of that book. And this book, which has been in our Bibles for centuries, has been dispensing wisdom to all who read it. That's where the title comes from. But who exactly is this unnamed preacher, because he or she does not sign their name to it? Well, this individual identifies himself only as the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And so if we're thinking about what kind of person could match that description, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, there's really only one person that matches that. Solomon is King David's son, the one who ruled in his stead after him. And so the church for centuries has identified him as the author. And of course, there are several sections that we're going to notice as we study through Ecclesiastes that match the experiences of Solomon's life. Now, more recently, many scholars do not believe that Solomon wrote this book. In fact, even many conservative scholars would say that Solomon is not the author. And I don't have the time and space in this message to unravel that for you all, but I'll summarize what I think this way. I don't think that the reasons they deny authorship for Solomon are objective enough to overturn what the church has seen for several centuries. We're going to be passing out a resource guide later this week, emailing it to you. If you'd like to do further reading on this subject, we've got lots of resources. You can sort through all the little details of the argument there. But I'm going to be assuming throughout this series that the book was indeed authored by Solomon. So, we understand what the title is, who the author is. What in the world is this book about? What is its purpose? How does this book that was written thousands of years ago answer Tom Brady's conundrum? If a man who from outward appearances literally has it all, everything that you could possibly imagine, and he's looking for more, then how can regular schmucks like us find meaning and purpose in life working at our regular 9 to 5? Well, the preacher starts to give us an answer in verse 2. Look at verse 2. He says, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "all is vanity." What does he mean by that? Well, to our English ears, when we hear the word vanity, I automatically assume, and I would guess you would assume this as well, I automatically assume that he's talking about an inflated opinion of oneself, particularly one's appearance. When you talk about vanity, you're talking about a person who has a much higher opinion of themselves than everyone else around them has. That's not what Solomon means. And it's important that we get an understanding of what this word means, because this word is used 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. This word is used, over half of the uses in the Old Testament are found right here. And this statement that vanity of vanities, all is vanity, kind of bookends the book. It starts with that. And then if you look all the way, and you don't have to flip there, we'll have it on the screen, but if you flip all the way to the end of the book in chapter 12 and verse 8, we find the refrain once again, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "all is vanity." So the word vanity literally means breath or vapor. The Psalms use this term a lot to refer to the fact that life is a breath. Life is a vapor. You are born and your life passes like this. It's like the passing of a shadow. But this word in Ecclesiastes is often paired with the phrase striving after the wind or chasing the wind. In fact, that phrase appears 9 times. He says all of life is a vanity. It's a vapor. It's a breath. It's chasing after the wind. And we all know that chasing after the wind is a fruitless endeavor, right? Even if you could catch up to the wind, you couldn't grasp it in your hands. It's a fool's errand. This word vanity refers to something that is ephemeral, it's transient, it's impermanent, it is frustratingly enigmatic and difficult to figure out. Solomon is making a statement about life, and he's making that statement in the strongest possible of terms when he says vanity of vanities. That's a Hebrew form of saying this is the most of anything. You've heard of the Holy of Holies in the temple? The Holy of Holies in the temple was the holiest area of the temple. It was so holy that only one person in all of Israel could enter that place one time a year. The Holy of Holies was the absolute holiest place in the temple. When the Bible describes Jesus as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, it's saying that there is no king higher than King Jesus. He is the King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. And it's an expression of the very top. And Solomon is describing life and the vanity of life as a vanity of vanities. In case you miss it, he says it again. And in case you're not quite sure what the scope is that he's talking about, he finishes by saying, all is vanity. the meaning of life is frustratingly elusive. To borrow a phrase from Winston Churchill, who was not talking about this, it is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Solomon takes that rather pessimistic statement about the nature of life and he repurposes it for us in verse 3 in the form of a question. So look with me now at verse 3. It says, "What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun?" This is another version of Brady's question. Is this all there is? I mean, most of us think that if we just had a little bit more of this or that life would have meaning and purpose and happiness and joy. And yet the wisest man who ever lived and one of the most accomplished men that is living right now were both scratching their heads, having experienced all that life had to offer, and say, is this it? What profit is there? What gain is there from everything that we do in this world? And then the preacher breaks into a poem about the cycle of life, which one author has described as the treadmill of existence. Look at verses 4 to 11. He says this, "A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." So Solomon, in giving this super depressing poem, is saying generations come and go. Think about your home, if you own it, and the land that it sits on. Think about the thousands and thousands of feet that have walked in history that have walked across your lawn that you think, because you've got a little piece of paper that says it, that you think you own that. Like that we could own a piece of earth. Generations come and go. The circle of life keeps going on. The sun rises and then it sets and then it rises again. The wind blows one direction and then another and then it starts again. The water cycle, the rivers and whatever other things there are, creeks. Sometimes words fail me. Bodies of waters flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never overflowing. Waves keep crashing onto the shore again and again, and yet the shore is still there and the waves keep coming. It can be comforting, and sometimes the Bible tells us to take comfort in the cycle of life. But it can also be wearying, because there's nothing new under the sun. Now, I know Solomon didn't have an iPad or gluten-free pretzels, but there is nothing new under the sun. And to top it all off, we don't remember who came before us, and people who come after us aren't going to remember us. I don't know my great-grandfather's first name. Do you? I'm sure there's some of you that do. The Ancestry.com people. I don't even know his name. my great-grandchildren or my great-great-grandchildren aren't going to have a clue who I am, nor will they care. Now, as we're going to see, Solomon is not telling us that there's no point to life. The author Doug Wilson says this: vanity does not refer to an absolute meaninglessness, but an inscrutable, that word inscrutable means mysterious, an inscrutable, mysterious repetitiveness. In other words, a lot of times, life is like a broken record. When you say, I know I sound like a broken record, what do you mean? You mean that I keep repeating myself. Now, there are those of you here who have never seen or heard of a record player. Record players are still cool. But a record player would sometimes get stuck and repeat the same musical phrase. As that record would spin under the needle, would repeat the same phrase over and over and over and over again, and you get caught in it. Think about the repetitive nature of your life. You make the same amount of coffee every morning. You drive the same way to work every day. You file the same papers every day. You eat the same sandwiches. You do this gigantic load of laundry, and not 24 hours later, that load of laundry is magically as big as it was before. You change your child's diaper, you walk away, and then you change the child's diaper again, and then you change it again, and then you change it again. You mow the lawn, and then you mow it again. You fill the car up with gas, and then you run out of gas and you fill it up again. Imagine poor Tom Brady having to wake up to the same supermodel every morning. Life can be mysteriously repetitive. Think about all of the work that you're trying to accomplish. Things you're trying to build, the grades on the report card, the college you're trying to get into, the job you're trying to be successful at, the wealth that you're trying to build, the business you're trying to create, the children that you're trying to rear. Think about all of the sweat and worry and staying up late and stress that you experience, and you're going to pour yourself into all of this. You're going to work overtime, and then you're going to die. And in about 50 years, you're going to be forgotten. I promise church isn't always this depressing. Pink Floyd put it this way: and you run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking, racing around to come up behind you again. The sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older, shorter of breath, and one day closer to death. Most of us don't think about life in these terms, partially because we're so busy distracting ourselves with our phones 1 3-minute video at a time. But the Bible asks us sometimes to step away and answer some of the questions that Tom Brady's asking. It asks us to step away and have a healthy perspective on this life and what it means and what in the world we're doing and why in the world we're doing it. So in the words of this interviewer from 60 Minutes, what's the answer? What is the key to finding meaning and satisfaction and happiness in life? Well, when the preacher says that life is vanity, it's vapor, it's futility, he is not saying this. He is not saying that life has no inherent meaning. He's not saying that we are the accidents of an impersonal universe who has belched us out to make the best of it until we go back to the nothingness that we came from. That's not what he's saying. The key to life is not recognizing that there is no key to life and there is no point, so just try and make the best of it. You may say that that describes your belief system, but that is the perspective of nihilism. Nihilism works as a theory. It does not work in practice. None of us live that way. Well, here's the beginning of an answer. And this is a quote from a man by the name of Wright. The world does not contain the key to itself. Here's what he means by that when he says that the world does not contain the key to itself. If you are going to try to cobble together meaning in life using only the resources that are around you, the people and the work and the pleasure and all the stuff that life has to offer, you will keep yourself busy, but you will not at the end of the day find yourself enlightened because the key is not inside of life. Jeffrey Meyer puts it this way: life in itself is unable to supply the key to the question of identity, meaning, purpose, value, and destiny. Scientific inquiry can answer all kinds of questions for us. It can reveal to us the inner workings of the universe and the pull of gravity and how electrons move around and all the sorts of things that science can do. But there's one question that science can't answer, more than one. But one of the questions that science can't answer is this: what's the point? I understand how it works, but at the end of the day, are you satisfied simply knowing that, well, this is how it works? No, we have built into us a desire to understand not only how, but why. We want to know what the point is. And Ecclesiastes was written, according to Gleason Archer, to convince men of the uselessness of any worldview which does not rise above the horizon of man himself. In other words, if your perspective is limited to that which is under the sun, that's a phrase that's used in verse 3 and is used 30 more times in the book. If you're going to try to create meaning and purpose and happiness using the materials that life itself gives you under the sun, you're never going to get there. Because meaning and purpose and joy ultimately occur above the horizon. The key to life is not discovered by investigation. It is received through revelation. And that is the profound key that the author of Ecclesiastes gives us at the end of the book. Listen to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. After progressing through all these discussions that we're going to walk through over the course of the next few months, he says this: the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. We have to look above the horizon to see the God who is there, the God who created us in his image, the key to finding meaning and satisfaction and purpose and happiness in life. If you don't have outside revelation telling you a finite speck on a planet, in a solar system, in a galaxy, in a nebula, in a universe, if you don't have God, how in the world are you in your brief vapor of life, how in the world do you think you can find the meaning? You are a blip. And so am I. Only when you start with God can your life have meaning and you possess joy. And so this is the theme of Ecclesiastes that I like for us to explore together over the next few weeks and months. Life has meaning and joy only when lived in the light of the God who is there. Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying is that if you stick your head in the sand and refuse to believe that God is there, that you can never have any meaning or experience any joy. That's not what I'm saying. But you will and I will ultimately never find true purpose and meaning and real lasting joy unless we live in the light of the God who is there. We're going to take months to unpack that, but here's what it doesn't mean. When you start with God, it does not mean that you get to escape the frustrations of life. So, I'm sorry to let you down on that. But often we want to find the key to life, because if I can find the key to life, if I can find the key to meaning and purpose and satisfaction in life, then I can drive. If I can find the key, I can drive, and I can make sure that all the difficult, frustrating things of life, all this repetitiveness, this rat race, this treadmill, I can avoid all of that. And that's not what Solomon is saying. Even those whose faith in God is strong are subject to the same frustrations in life that everyone else experiences. But having that key does allow us to find meaning, purpose, and yes, even joy. Joy greater than any of us could possibly imagine. As I said, we're going to talk about the implications of that statement. But the fact that there is a God who is there, the fact that you are one day going to die and stand before him and give an account, means that we must do what one person has told us in the author of a book called Living Life Backward. You begin with the end in mind. You remember, as important as the here and now seems, and the stress and the overtime and everything that's going on, you remember that one day you are going to die. And you are going to stand before God who has seen every single thing you've done, whether it's been in secret or done in the light. You are going to have to give an account. And if you are going to have a life that has meaning and purpose, a life that matters, and a life that experiences joy now and forever, you've got to live life backwards with the end in mind. And we're going to talk about how to do that as we study this book together. Well, Solomon is not the last word of wisdom on this subject. And I said at the beginning that one of the things that we wanted to do this morning is see how Ecclesiastes points us forward to Jesus and the gospel, the good news of what Jesus has accomplished in his life and death and resurrection. Because the Old Testament, all of it, the books that we understand and the books that we don't understand, the prophetic books that seem bizarre and obscure sometimes, the lists of long Old Testament Mosaic laws that are difficult for us to unravel, the Bible tells us, Jesus tells us in his own words, that all of it points to him. All of it is pointing forward to what he is going to accomplish on the cross. He is the ultimate revelation and the ultimate fulfillment. So you might be asking me how Jesus does that in Ecclesiastes. Well, remember, the preacher introduces himself to us as a king at the beginning of the book. And as king, he is the successor to his father David, whom God called to be shepherd over his people Israel. Solomon stood in a long line of kings that would ultimately culminate in the King of Kings, King Jesus. Solomon, following in his father's footsteps, was the shepherd king of Israel. Ezekiel 34 is a critique by the prophet Ezekiel of the long line of shepherds who have failed to lead their people to God, who have failed to lead them in the right path. They have failed to reflect the Lord is my shepherd from Psalm 23. Solomon is one of these shepherd kings, and at the end of the book, he says this in chapter 12 and verse 11, "The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd." So Solomon, as the shepherd king of Israel, dispensed wisdom for living like goads, prods, from one shepherd, the shepherd who leads the people down the right path. Solomon's wisdom, as great as it was incomplete. Solomon's life, as great as it was inconsistent. Okay, if you know Solomon's story, you know that he lived a fantastically amazing life. He had more experiences than you think one person could humanly have. He was filled, he's one of the wisest men, the wisest man who ever lived, and yet Solomon's life, great as it was filled with inconsistencies, failures, sins, a failure to heed his own wisdom. And thus, Solomon, as great as he was, points us forward to the need for our great shepherd king, King Jesus. The Apostle Paul's desire was for the Christians in the churches to which he wrote, and is found in Colossians chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. And he says this, his prayer for them was to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding and the knowledge of God's mystery, which is Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Solomon, the wise shepherd king, points us forward to our need for the all-wise, perfect shepherd king, King Jesus. In the Old Testament, we often see the authors personify wisdom. Wisdom is personified as a woman who stands in the street calling out her wisdom to all those who are passing by and who will hear her. In the Old Testament, we often see the personification of wisdom, but in the New Testament, we see the incarnation of wisdom. Wisdom becomes flesh and bone. Here's what Jesus said of himself in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 42. He said, "The Queen of Sheba came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here." That's Jesus saying, "Use Solomon to point you to me." When Jesus says something greater than Solomon is here, he means that someone greater than Solomon is here. Life has meaning and joy when lived in the light of the God who is there, who is most fully declared to us, who is most clearly seen in the person and work of Jesus Christ, who took on flesh and came. Jesus himself said in John chapter 10 and verse 10, "I came that they might have life and have it abundantly." Jesus came to rescue us from the futility, the vanity, the emptiness that life can have. If you stop and think about it, it can be greatly alarming to realize that your life is a vapor, that it seems like you've got a long time, but it's here and then it's gone. And then Jesus comes in and rescues and redeems all of it. Jesus doesn't simply come as a sage on a mountaintop dispensing pithy sayings. He comes, takes on flesh. He experiences the futility of life. He subjects himself to the the repetitiveness of life. He experiences the injustices of life along with us. He lives with the end in mind. His sacrificial death. 1 Peter 1 verses 18 and 19 says this, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. So perhaps you are here with us this morning and you are realizing, as I've been talking and as we've been looking at this, that you have been trying to find meaning and purpose and satisfaction and happiness in life using the building blocks that life itself gives you. And perhaps you are waking up to the realization that one day you're going to get to the end and realize that you are no closer than when you started to finding that elusive thing called joy. That elusive thing called meaning. The gospel is the good news that Christ redeems us. He liberates us through the payment of a price. And do you know what that price is? That price was his blood. And you can be redeemed from a futile life by putting your faith in Christ this morning. And if you want more information about that, we would love to have conversations with you. But let me say a word to the Christians that are here this morning. As Christians, we are faced with the constant temptation to find meaning and satisfaction and joy in the gifts that God has given rather than the giver. And I want you to understand me clearly here as we go through Ecclesiastes. Solomon in God's word is going to give us all kinds of encouragements to enjoy life, to eat and to drink, to enjoy the wife of your youth, to work hard, to do all the kinds of things that God has given us to be busy with on this earth. But don't let it stop there. Those things are gifts meant to point you to the giver, and only in the giver will you find meaning and joy. And we are constantly faced with the temptation to no longer raise our eyes above the horizon and live like under the sun is all we've got. So in Ecclesiastes, we have the invitation, once again, to live a life of meaning and purpose and joy in light of the God who is there. John Wesley was preaching through the book of Ecclesiastes, and he wrote this in one of his journals about this book. He said, this book proves the grand truth that there is no happiness out of God. And so what we're going to be doing over the next few months is we are going to be pursuing joy with all of our hearts. So don't get me wrong. As depressing as some of the stuff that we talked about is, this is not the pursuit of, well, it's really difficult, so let's make the best of it and find out how God fits in. No, this is the pursuit of joy. So let's take these next few months to reorient our focus, to enjoy God's good gifts of work and family and pleasure, but to ultimately find that joy and meaning in the God who is there. Let's pray.